Hello guys, welcome to the first episode of this course where we are going to learn about asynchronous programming in JavaScript. So I assume you know nothing about asynchronous programming in JavaScript, by the way. So you're here to learn about the concept and the ideas related to asynchronous programming. You want to learn about promises, you want to learn about async and await keywords, and you want to see these in action so that you can better understand the ideas and you can start using the libraries that provide asynchronous APIs. So this is going to be a tutorial of 10 episodes. As always, I have prepared the notes. We're going to study the notes, and on my other desktop I have a simple solution folder. Right now there is not much inside of it really. It's just a simple index.html file. We're gonna run it using live server. I have installed live server, as you can see here. So we're gonna run the application, the index.html file, using live server inside of our browser. And you're going to see in action the ideas of asynchronous programming episode by episode. For each episode, as always, I'm going to create branches, and I'm going to walk you through the ideas, and we're going to write the code together, and then you're going to see in action in your browser what is going on. And for this tutorial, I have created a simple backend API as well that we're going to communicate with. We're going to fetch some items, some tasks from, and then in future episodes chances are I will probably create other endpoints as well. I'm not going to focus on the backend API because this is not the focus of this course. I just wanted to tell you that I've got this backend API running on my local machine. This is a simple API, by the way, that I have used in some other tutorials as well. We're not going to talk about that here. But if you're interested to know more about integrating with backend APIs with, let's say, React, Angular, and so on, there are courses on my YouTube channel that you can watch. So let's get started and talk about asynchronous programming and callbacks. The objectives of this first episode is for you to understand the problem with synchronous code. I want to tell you, and I want you to learn what asynchronous code is in programming languages. Then we're going to talk about callback functions and where they're used, and we're going to simulate some asynchronous behavior using setTimeout. Let's talk a little bit about asynchronous programming in JavaScript. So JavaScript is single-threaded. It means that it can do one thing at a time. So imagine you're making a network request to get some data from your backend API from some server. That could, for example, take 2 seconds or more. If JavaScript waited for that task to finish, like 2 to 3 seconds, 5 seconds, the whole application would freeze. Instead, JavaScript uses asynchronous programming to handle such long operations without blocking the main thread of the application. So it kind of starts that task, that time-consuming task, but it doesn't stop there. And then when the result of that task is ready, it can handle that result by, for example, showing it to the user, right? Or using it to update something. So it doesn't freeze, it starts a task. This is the idea of asynchronous programming. Then you do whatever you want to do. You do not block the main thread of the application, and when the result of that task is ready, you handle it. And there are different approaches to asynchronous programming. In JavaScript, you can use callbacks, you can use promises, you can use async and await keywords. We're going to explore all of those in this tutorial. So callback functions are the simplest way to handle this, the simplest way, and I would say like the most dangerous way. So the idea of callback functions is that you pass in a function to be executed later. You pass in a function as the input parameter to another function, and that main function, the receiving function, is going to execute that callback function later inside of its, let's say, the body of the function. I'm going to talk about that. I mean, this is the first episode, right? The first episode is about doing some asynchronous programming with callback functions. So first, let's talk a little bit about synchronous programming and what would happen if we, let's say, do some time-consuming task, like, for example, communicating with a backend API in a synchronous manner. Take a look at this. We've got this function. The name is getDataSync. So it's going to fetch some data from a backend API, and let's assume this is going to take, I don't know, like 5 seconds, right? So it's a time-consuming task. If we do not do synchronous programming, this means that we're going to wait for this task to complete, to produce the result that we want. And then when that result is ready, when this data is ready, we're going to print it to the console. So if we do this operation in a synchronous manner, it means that we're going to freeze the application here. We're going to block the main thread of the application here and wait for that to complete. This is synchronous code. This is what most programmers are familiar with. You run some piece of code, you wait for the result, and then you move on to the next line of code. And then when you do that thing on the next line of code, you move on to the next line of code. This is synchronous. But asynchronous means you dispatch a task, you continue running the rest of the code, and when that task is ready, when the result of that task is ready, you handle it. So the above would block execution. Instead, let's simulate asynchronous programming using callbacks. So the first approach to writing asynchronous code is callback. And we're going to see an example of this in this episode. And we're going to simulate our time-consuming task using setTimeout function. So using the setTimeout function, we are simulating let's say a time-consuming task which takes 2 seconds to complete, right? So inside of this, we're creating this object, and we are going to console log data fetched, and then we're going to call the callback, which we receive here. So this is going to take 2 seconds to complete. Now, when we want to call the getData function, we need to pass the callback as the input parameter. And as I showed you and told you, this callback is going to be executed later in the body of the function that receives that callback. So this is going to be, for example, our callback. The callback is going to receive some data, and it's going to print that data to the console. Now, we're going to call the main function, the get function, and we're going to pass display data as the callback. So this means that the set timeout is going to complete after 2 seconds. So this is like communicating with a backend API. And when the data is ready, is going to be handled using the callback that we have passed to the function. So by passing a function as the input parameter to another function, you are kind of creating an asynchronous scenario. This is the simplest way to write some asynchronous code. I've got some explanation here as well. So getData takes a function called callback as a parameter. It simulates a 2-second delay as a real API communication scenario might. And once the data is complete, it calls the callback with the result. And the callback, which in this case is called display data, this is passed to the main function, like a function callback, and then it gets the data after the delay, and then it shows it to the user in the console. Now, what I want to do is to show you the data that we're going to receive from our backend API. I told you that I have an endpoint which returns this simple object. The API is running on my local machine. On my local machine on port 3000, I'm going to integrate with it. So we're going to create 2 files. I've got index.html. We're going to create episode1.js as well. And then this is the code for our HTML file. As you can see, I've got a reference to my JavaScript file, and I've got my JS file here as well. Now let me go ahead and write the code for the HTML file, and then I will move back to the note to write the code for the JavaScript file as well. So we're going to have a simple HTML file. The code is going to be very simple. We have a reference to episode 1.js. So let me save this file. Let me zoom in. I'm going to create episode 1.js as well, and we're going to move back to the notes. So take a look at the code. This is the exact code that we have we previously had. We're not integrating with the backend API yet. Let's leave that to the next episode. So in this episode, let's just simulate that backend API communication by constructing this object here, right? After 2 seconds, we are assuming that the data is ready. We're going to say that the data fetching thing is complete. Now we're going to use this callback, which we received here, to kind of do the processing that we want with the data, which in this case is going to render it to the console. So let me go ahead and run the write the code for my JavaScript file as well. So I'm going to create this get data function. I'm going to simulate a 2-second delay. After 2 seconds, the data is going to be ready. I'm going to call back. I'm going to use the callback to process that data. Now let's write the function for the callback. It's going to be display data. It's going to console log the data. And then of course we're going to call the main function get data and pass in the display data back to the nodes. So how to run it? I told you I'm going to use live server in VS Code to run this. So we're going to go to index.html and we're going to see how we can run this using live server. So I have run the live server extension with my index.html, and this is the application, right? So I mean, here what we are going to do is to refresh the application again, the index.html file. Well, we'll see that the data fetching thing is going to be complete after 2 seconds, and we're going to see this data that we have received, for example, from the backend API. So let me refresh data fetching. After 2 seconds, the data fetching thing is complete, and we're seeing this data inside of the console of our browser. So this is the way callbacks handle the asynchronous coding requirement for us. So basically the idea is simple. You have one main method, right? You pass in another function as the callback, and then you use it inside of the body of your main method after some time. For example, in this case, we are simulating a 2-second delay for some backend API communication, and after 2 seconds, when the data is ready, I'm going to call that callback, and we're going to pass the data that we have received as parameter, as input parameter to that callback. And we have defined the main function, we have defined the callback, and then we're calling the main function with the callback. But I mean, even though callbacks may seem like an easy function, like an easy approach, they can get out of hand very easily. There is this concept called callback hell, or the pyramid of doom, that I'm gonna talk about in future episodes, and you're gonna understand the problems that the callback approach is going to create. And then, well, when we move to the better approaches like promises, for example, you will see how cleaner the code can become. So let's wrap up this episode. We now understand how asynchronous behavior works in JavaScript, right? So we have a kind of a rough idea that asynchronous programming means you dispatch a task, you do not wait for the result, because the result will be produced after some delay. So you continue whatever you were doing, right? And when the result is ready, you do whatever you want with it. For example, using the callback, you can print it to the console. So in this episode, we, for example, simulated that delay using setTimeout function. We created callback functions to handle the result after, like for example, a 2-second delay. But in the next episode, we're going to connect to the local API that I just told you about, and we're going to, see in action what the callback, let's say callback based asynchronous code might look like to fetch some real data from a backend API, from an API running on my local machine. And that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If that's the case, as always, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.